Okay, today's a little bit of a different video because today I want to talk about why I don't actually think that current AI technology is a threat to my career on YouTube, which is probably a very different sounding tone when compared to my constant doomerism about AI's broader effect on the rest of the world. Obviously, I'm very pessimistic about the general effects of AI on the labor force, for example. I make no pretense about that skepticism. I have strong opinions about the types of damage it will end up causing, especially. But there's an interesting thing that happens in the comment section, or in my email inbox as well, when I post that kind of material, which is a deluge of comments sometimes about how I'm just coping. The general sentiment I see quite often is that AI is here to stay. I represent the old man yelling at clouds sort of meme. And then the most interesting feedback is when people say, cope and seethe, AI will take your job, which is a very troubling idea if it were true. For starters, these people are mostly correct. AI is definitely here to stay, even if I wish that weren't true in a lot of ways. I sometimes do feel like the old man yelling at the clouds, but the idea that AI will render my YouTube channel obsolete is something I now fully disagree with. I didn't always disagree with that idea, but the more I learn, the less I'm actually afraid of that happening, and today I want to talk about why that is. Of course, I do want to clarify that AI is quickly imposing a variety of consequences on the general labor force. It will almost certainly create ripple effects and destroy entire career fields with widespread impacts in tow. But hyper-focusing on just myself, I'm not actually worried about AI competing with me directly here on YouTube, because the content that I produce, I think at least most of it, doesn't really fit within the framework of how these language models are intended to operate. To be clear, that doesn't mean that AI won't cause some problems for me, such as oversaturating the platform with content that then competes for general attention, siphoning viewership that way, which is certainly possible. But I don't think AI will flat out replace what I do with comparable quality videos. Or, if it eventually does, it won't be anytime soon. So why not? Well, this is definitely going to be a hatchet job of an explanation right now, but here goes. Large language models, LLMs, work by predicting the most likely subsequent word in a sentence, typically, and they do this as a function of their training data. This means that if we ask the AI what is a great sandwich with two ingredients between the bread, odds are it might say peanut butter and jelly, or ham and cheese, because those words in that order are extremely common in the training data and seem to make sense for the question. A really good example is if you ask an LLM to complete the sentence and then say the sky is ... it might say blue, even though it could say hundreds or thousands of other things that would also technically be true, because blue is the most common. It might also spit out a complicated string of overly poetic garbage, but the point is that the algorithm is not thinking about the holistic answer. It's thinking about what comes next in the sequence. I'm not even really qualified to give the best explanation of this, but the point I'm trying to make is that large language models operate by trying to complete a string of words with whatever it thinks should come next as per the training data, which can obviously be fine-tuned or manipulated for different tasks or showcase differing levels of advancement between the separate models. But the end result is that AI really just tends to spit out the most popular or the most generic answers it can, because the goal isn't to find a unique combination of words, even when explicitly prompted to do so. The mechanism is to find the most likely combination of words. A common descriptive phrase here is stochastic parrot, which basically means the large language models can regurgitate more and more complicated sentences, but they never have and never will understand the sentence or the meaning of the words. Not everyone agrees with this, by the way. Some people claim that large language models are in fact beginning to understand that kind of meaning. But the point is that when you give them a prompt, they use that prompt, as a result of their training data, to send back a sequence of letters, forming words and sentences, obviously, that seem to be the most correct response. Well, that's incredibly good if you're making straightforward content on YouTube with a simplistic premise, or if you want to summarize content and produce descriptions of well-known events like true crime, science, history, etc. Things where the next word in the sentence actually achieves the goal of the video as well. But that's not really what I do. In fact, in a lot of cases, what I try to do is the exact opposite of that, even so far as to cause me kind of problems, because being a contrarian and disagreeing with a common narrative simply for the sake of it can result in backlash or criticism. See, some of the content I'm most proud of, even better, some of the content on the channel that is by far the most successful or high viewership, is unexpected conclusions from relatively unknown data. I like finding a preprint research paper and then connecting that research paper to a lawsuit, and then connecting those two things to a modern day company with a final conclusion afterward, strung together because of the separate implications at each of those unique steps. Here's a better example. When I talk about the drones over New Jersey, which was certainly a common headline for a while, at least in America, I went back to declassified CIA documents from decades ago, and then connected those to media descriptions of UFOs that people claim to have seen more recently. And all of it came together in the form of a question, alongside an interview with former President Truman, about secret government programs and congressional oversight, which I haven't really seen anyone else mentioning within the context of drones over New Jersey. It's interesting to me because the ability for a language model to accurately predict the most likely next word in a sentence has value, but the videos I make are not typically intended to be the most likely description of a current event. Whether or not I'm actually good at doing this, that's up to the viewer. Some people would say no. But my typical goal is to find unexpectedly connecting dots and then use those dots to ask questions about what reality might be. Even better, if I can find insider documents or hidden clues tucked away on obscure forums or bits of information that I'm not even technically supposed to have, especially stuff that I can't publicly access, like a whistleblower or something like that, that's like the best version of the content that I want to make. That's the ideal stuff. But it's also the exact opposite of how AI is built to convey information, which is why I'm not really as worried about it as I used to be. Another interesting thing here is that because so many different companies are now training their own unique proprietary AI models, and because data is so valuable in that process, a lot of these companies are becoming much, much more protective of the content and the data that they do have. Bloomberg, as just one example, has an AI program trained on all of their finance data, which is great, good for them. But that AI is not really capable of bridging the gap between a forum post from 15 years ago, which it doesn't have access to in its training data, a YouTube video from 5 months ago, also doesn't have access, a research paper from last week, maybe it can access that part, but probably not, and a press release from today, all pertaining to the same executive at the same company whose name might have changed because they were married halfway through it all and now got fired for committing fraud or something like that. The Bloomberg AI may be able to write a paragraph about why this executive got fired, built around the most common explanations from finance articles or blog posts in its training data, but it just doesn't even know about these other pieces of the puzzle. And even if it did know about them, they wouldn't be the most likely or most common answer. Do you see what I mean? I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm somehow great at doing this, but the ultimate goal is to find connections that no one else sees and publish them first. Obviously, that's not always possible. I do a hefty amount of opinion content or just basic summaries for current events when I have nothing else in the pipeline. But what I really want to do, and what is by far the most successful content in the channel's entire history, is draw conclusions between items that are less commonly explored, thus giving the audience a reason to even watch the video in the first place. Theoretically, if there was one AI model out there trained on basically everything that exists, the closest would be ChatGPT so far, I think. But now that their scraping practices are being widely scrutinized and there's so many lawsuits against them, I don't really think that they can keep that up. But if there was one model trained on literally everything, that would be the biggest threat to what I do on YouTube. A model that is widely trained could potentially be tweaked so that it forms connections between very obscure data points. But even then, you'd have to spot check every single thing it ever did, effectively defeating the purpose of having it done for you to begin with. Maybe someday that practice could be perfected, but it's a hypothetical because no model has that level of training. Because these companies all compete against each other, we're talking about Amazon, Google, OpenAI, Bloomberg, right? All these different massive tech companies, isolating their data and training their own models. The ability for a human to actually bridge those gaps and access these other platforms for the sake of research or speculation or connecting dots or opinion, whatever it is much more valuable and, thankfully, much less likely to become obsolete. Sure, it's slower, dramatically slower for a human to read and process and make these connections or log into alternate accounts to access new data sets from different tech companies. But the fact that they even can gives them a substantial and, right now at least, unassailable advantage. Just to be clear, I'm not even talking about personality right now or human connection. Content creators who rely on connecting with their audience as people through humor or emotion, etc., they're insulated from this problem as well, for different reasons. But even content creators who rely solely on publishing information or opinions can still be insulated as long as they make a conscious effort to produce things that diverge from the common existing narrative. If you ask an AI program to create a YouTube video or script or whatever about dinosaurs, as a random example, it can probably do it. Even now, already, it can do it. It can draw from the most common existing literature, it can give you the most homogenized descriptions, which would likely be accurate, and it can put out moderately edited visuals, together creating something probably boring, but also clickable. People looking for a description of what is a triceratops don't really care how the video got made, as long as it gives them a proper description of what is a triceratops. But if you ask an AI program to give you a complex opinion supported by evidence, it's really just going to spit out an amalgamation of SEO blog posts and mainstream news articles. And that's assuming the topic that you asked about is popular to begin with. The more obscure you get, the more it struggles. And I'm starting to think it may always struggle in that particular way, or at least long enough for me to not worry about losing my job in the next couple of years. The program isn't built to connect obscure dots and form new opinions. Even worse, as soon as you start using platforms like Pacer to find lawsuits, that's what that's for, and those platforms have a cost associated with them per page, right? You have to pay actual money. The AI has a whole new set of barriers inflicted on it for that, which extend back to the user, the one who's inputting the prompts. And all of this makes no mention of the fact that AI programs have developer-imposed guardrails on top of this. They call it alignment, which is a good thing to be conscious of, but also requires the question, aligned with who? Tech bros like to say aligned with humanity, but that's an overgeneralization, ignoring the fact that a person somewhere is programming that alignment, which means the AI is now subjected to human choices in terms of what it can and cannot say for answers. This comes with bias, it comes with politics, and the end result is that if you compare complex opinion or analytical content from humans to that which is generated by AI, one of them is basically unrestricted, aside from time and effort, while the other has rampant restrictions, which almost guarantee that it can never truly produce something that's unique. Obviously, I'm not claiming that all the content on this channel is unique every step of the way, not by any stretch, but the goal is to make things that draw new conclusions. The goal is to make things that connect new dots in interesting ways, and the more I witness what AI has become, even with advancements practically every single day, the more it feels like even the most advanced version of these programs won't really be able to do that. I'm not saying they don't have value or danger associated, but for the type of content that I produce here on YouTube, it feels like there's a level of insulation, right down to the very core premise of how AI works and is being developed, which gives me freedom not to be as concerned about whether or not the channel will get flat out destroyed by a flood of similar content in the coming years. I don't think it will, and I hope I'm right about that. Sadly, AI will supplant, destroy, and make miserable, most of all, a large number of existing careers, from legal work to coding and many more. But after witnessing the past couple years of development, I'm actually not very concerned about my own ability to keep doing this, because I don't think AI has the capability of replacing me. Like I said before, it will still affect me, but I'm not really worried about somehow losing the ability to attract viewership, if I actually do a good job and produce content like I have in the past. In essence, I don't feel very doomerish today, which is a nice feeling. Ultimately, that puts the onus back on me as a creator, of course, to find topics that deserve and benefit from a human perspective of curiosity. So feel free to give me feedback on things that you think I should cover down below in the comment section. This past week, I honestly came up with basically nothing, or this past weekend, rather. I desperately want to avoid modern US politics. It's a cesspit, I want nothing to do with it. But it's also dominating the news cycle and choking out some of the other discourse that I would normally be interested in. So yeah, any ideas, very welcome to put that down below. But I'm also in a pretty good headspace, honestly, because I don't feel as pessimistic about the future of the platform as a direct result of AI compared to previously. It's a nice feeling. That's it. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below: locals and Patreon, monthly memberships, a special VPN deal, merchandise, social media, etc., etc. A very different video today than normally, but I don't know, this is just like sheer stream of consciousness opinion, and I wanted to put this one out there because it's something that makes me feel happy. I feel good about this. I feel less threatened by AI than I used to, and that's positive. Anyway, I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, question everything, and have a nice night.